right, rock and roll. All right, Matt
Greg
Hughes in the house. Can we get a little introduction on who's the greatness that's sitting in front of me?
Yeah, well, I'm sitting next to the greatest.
False.
But no, Matt Hughes, as you know. So I not recently, but in the last couple of years, transitioned out of corporate tech into interior design.
Yeah.
Really just based off of this idea that like life is stressful, right? And I really am trying to find that intersection of what makes me happy, what makes me feel fulfilled, but also what pays the bills.
Yeah.
Right. And just kind of naturally fell into interior design. You helped me sell that space when I first moved to Chicago from San Francisco. And I was just astonished at how successful that sale was by simply doing design, right? We didn't do a lot of reconstruction. We didn't do anything that required a bunch of labor to make it happen. And it really just inspired me that not only should your space really be a reflection of you and somewhere where you're comfortable every day, but it needs to speak to your sellers or to your buyers as well. And so I kind of fell into that, and all of a sudden people are coming to me and they're like, wait, how'd you do that? Right? Like design is intimidating to so many people. And I kind of want to just like make it a little bit more approachable. And so the client list started building. And over the last 2 years, it's really started to become something that's becoming self-sustaining.
Yeah.
And so opened up a business called The Aesthetic Edit, which hopefully you'll be hearing a lot more about soon. And it's just been great. It's small. I'm really enjoying the clients. I'm loving the work. And that's kind of where we are.
It's incredible. So like, before I can continue, like I got to talk about the first time meeting you, right? It was, you guys came in during like COVID, right? You were in during COVID, and it was like, I'll never forget you personally, because you came in and it was the first time I realized that, like, because masks were a thing. I was like, oh, like masks can be personalized, because I remember your mask was just like, like beautiful, like rainbow colored. I was just like, I already love this guy. And it's like all through the mask, like, so I was like, immediately knew, I was like, your personality is going to be amazing. So, and your design like spoke to me before you even spoke to me. Like it's funny to kind of remember that one little point. But like, you're absolutely right. Like one of the most challenging things to consult on with clients, right, is how to make a space feel different, right? Because like the number one thing that people are not is visual. They just are not. So when a seller comes to me and they say, okay, what do I got to do? Like first declutter and all that stuff. But then there's like this additional element of like, you can massively change the outcome of your home if you can speak to consumers in a way where they're like, wow, like something about this space just feels great. And I don't know what it is. And it doesn't have to be much. It could be not just about decluttering, but it's also how furniture works in a home, how like specific updates are done. Like you can do inexpensive things, right, that give you so much more money just because it's about the value of doing something so many people can't do, right? So interior designers, I think, are one of the most unique professions for actual real skill that you can't replicate.
Right. That's not going to be taken over by AI.
No.
Right. Like you can get ideas. And I talk to clients about that all the time, where they're like, oh, well, I saw this in a catalog. I saw this in a catalog, and I'm just going to go buy all of these things and then set them in my place, which is great. It's going to photograph really well. People are going to walk in and they're going to say, wow, this person spent a lot of money on this place. But is it a reflection of you? Yeah. And like humans are just naturally wired to pick up on those sort of things. Something that's trending in design right now is really moving away from that minimalistic type design, right? I think if you look back 5 years ago, people that were staging homes were like, okay, everything needs to be white and gray and clean and sleek. It needs to appeal to a broad audience, which there's certain aspects of that are true. Yeah. But at the end of the day, like, is it inspiring to walk into a place that, could be anybody's home, right? And so what I like to do is find those ways to speak to a broad audience by using those really traditional pieces that can kind of stand the test of evolution as design changes, but also building around the unique aspects of you, right? So kind of, I speak to this a lot with my clients, of like the element of surprise, right? So like find a piece that is very unique to you. Maybe it's, I actually just worked on a space the other day, and a very white and clean space. And they were like, but I have this orange love seat that is Victorian era. I don't want to get rid of it. It's a unique piece. We ended up building around that. So finding those pops of like orange color throughout everything else, it's very kind of minimal and neutral toned. And they're getting such good feedback on the space because it's eye catching and it says, okay, there's something different about this person and this space that I'm not going to find at the next place I look at.
You know what interior design is? It's scary for so many people
Because
it's like, you know, I'll my wife is Nicaraguan, and there's a reason that I'm going towards this, right? Like for me, like my paint choices, for example, in my homes have always been like, oh, you know, like that off gray sounds good. My wife's like, I'm gonna hit you against the head, and I'm gonna puke all over your white design. And she's like colors and like intense greens and beautiful royal blues and all of these like yellows and you know it's like in the onset, like I was like really scared, right? Like I'm like you know I don't want to mess up my home because of like it's gonna be so personalized. But she did such a good job of like, how do I want to feel in the space? Right. So like in our living room, it's this beautiful, like royal blue toned like paint. And it is just so like I feel richer when I'm in the house. I'm like, something about me. It's like, no, motherfucker, it's because of the paint that I chose, Greg, you know? But it's like, it's even for me, like being a realtor that like does all of these different houses and sees all these different paint colors, it's scary because you just don't know what you don't know, right? So I think it's stepping out of that comfort zone and like understanding, because design gives emotion, right? And it's like understand, like, but also design can give bad emotion too, right? Well, like you've seen like terribly designed spaces where it's like horrible. Yeah, feng shui is a real thing, right? So can you give like some overall, I don't know, maybe like top 3 easiest things to do for somebody if they're like, I want to rearrange my room? Like what are some like just quick, like this should make you feel better because the energy will flow better? Anything that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, that's something too, you know, going back to like people just buying a bunch of really nice things and putting in a space, that's not design, that's shopping. Which,
it's like buying the most expensive wine bottle on the list because you think the most expensive is going to be the best. And
exactly.
It's not the case. Yeah.
Not always the case at all, but people oftentimes overlook the importance of like the foundational elements of being able to navigate a space intuitively, right? So like you don't really want to think about where do I have to turn next to get to point A to point B, right? Like you want to be able to walk in and immediately know what your path is to that next space. And so I think it's really important before you kind of lay out a space is to live in the space. Right. So I tell people a lot, they'll buy a new home and they're immediately like, okay, let's go hit the ground running. I want to get this place designed. And it's like, well, sit in it for a little bit, right? Like understand, like, how are you going to use that space? How are guests going to use your space? Are they, you know, going here more than they're going here? And does it just naturally flow? So that's one piece. But I think really just keeping it open, right? Like the days of maximalist design are, I don't want to say gone because there's a time and place for it, right? But in residential real estate, maximalism isn't really something that people are drawn to anymore because it feels cluttered, especially in a place like Chicago, right? Where like homes are a little bit smaller, or New York, where spaces are a little bit smaller. And oftentimes I meet people who are like, oh, the space is too small. I'm not going to really invest in interior design or put too much thought into where I put things. But to me, that's more of a call to do that and be thoughtful about it because you need to maximize how you're using that space. You need to maximize the value of it, right? It's like finding spaces in spaces is something I talk about a lot, or like making spaces within spaces. So you have these kind of different elements of, you know, I can go over here and I can read a book and drink coffee, but it's actually right across from a place where I'm going to be doing work, and still make them feel definitively different. If that makes sense. It's kind of hard to explain, and it's very, you know, it's unique to that space, right? Like you can't just walk in and say, oh yeah, go make a vignette over here, which a vignette is just a fancy term for like a little, how can I describe this? Like looking at a space and saying like, that's an unused corner over there, right? Like
I've never known, that's a vignette?
A vignette, yeah.
So it's like you see like this like little cubby weird, like a corner of an area. I'll be like, I can now sound fancier because I'll be like, check out that, look at that vignette.
Yeah. Well, think about it this way. If like you're like taking a photo for Instagram, right? It needs to be 4x5 or whatever it is. You're doing it for a story, not that you should design for Instagram content. But this is a good way to look at it because it's like what can fit in a small kind of like frame, right? A small aperture. And so like if you photograph a space of one chair, a short little end table, a really cool wall design, that's going to look like it's its own space. But if you zoom out from that, it's going to be like off of a living room, right? Where that space might be unused, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like defining a small space within a bigger space as something uniquely different that's going to evoke a different feeling, that's going to have a different function or purpose. So I talk a lot about that with people that are like, how do I just rearrange stuff?
Yeah, got you. Talk to me about colors right now. Like, I think what was the color of the year? It's like something crazy. I don't know.
Color of the year, actually. Well, there's different publishers
of
color of the year. I tend to move towards Pantone. They're kind of like the authority on
Pantone.
All things color.
Right. Yeah.
Love Pantone. I get a lot of inspiration from them, and it's like a fuzzy peach. It's kind of like this rose blush. It's a little bit feminine, but not so feminine that it's gonna be looked at as like, oh well, this isn't masculine enough, or like only a female needs to live here. It's just a very soft, kind of supple and warm color. You're seeing it pop up in a lot of places. I mean, I'm walking into rooms that are fully peach, which you would look at it or you hear and you're like, that's kind of crazy. When you see it, like if you kind of blend that in with softer ivories and really warm woods and things like that, it just creates this feeling of like comfort and safety and warmth, which we need in Chicago.
That's true.
A tundra here, right? But I love that color. And then royal blues as well. To mention your space, those are also very much trending right now. But if you think about color, I was actually just reading an article and talking to another designer. Right now, one of the biggest trends is what they're calling quiet luxury, which I love.
I actually love. Okay, go into that more.
Yes. So quiet luxury is essentially like a space looking very lush, if you will. Like it's a space where like it's comfortable, it's warm, it's inviting. Also looks like you put some money into it, but it's not overwhelming, right? Like there's this design trends in previous years where it's like everything needs to be glitz and glam and shiny and like bulky and just like really unique.
Brand name.
Exactly. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's like, I kind of equate it to going into say, I don't know if there's any luxury shoppers for like clothes that are listening to this conversation, but
we got the fanciest of people listening to this
there we
stuff.
go. Yeah. So, you go into like an Hermes or, one of these luxury retailers.
Okay.
It's perfect. Well, they do now. You walk into these spaces and it's like, it's not overwhelming, right? It's a neutral palette. Yeah. It's a very comforting space.
Right.
And so investing in pieces, to describe it a little bit more succinctly, investing in pieces that are traditional and can, again, kind of evolve as the design industry changes.
Yeah.
Instead of getting pieces that are like really abstract or really unique.
Okay.
You can have some of those in there, but don't completely design around that. So quiet luxury. So think of things like linens and ivories and warm woods and kind of just those really natural tones, and then kind of finding those pops of color around that. Yeah. So we're calling quiet luxury.
Yeah, because what I'm seeing on the architectural space, right, is that like there was like this big modern push of like blocks and like you said, like there's no character, there's no like just this is what it is, right? Like the it's about beautiful. It's like a doctor's office, right? Like it's just perfect, like sterile, exactly. And then it started to go more into like first, like we had this like big farmhouse push, and I don't know if the farmhouse push is like gone away, but it's definitely not being talked about anymore. Yeah. I think it's like kind of overplayed a little bit, and now we're going back to traditional. I feel like it's like this mix of like modern traditional, which I think that's where people are started stumbling because they're like, I want modern, but I want life in it. I want that color. So like I'm seeing these trends as well. And I'm actually surprised by the amount of interest there's been by consumers, right? Because like I don't necessarily see like the average consumer as being somebody that is willing to kind of go out of their comfort zone, but like I'm constantly surprised by like new design elements, and before like 10 years or 5 years ago, even like the European design of like Eastern European design of like really intense lighting and like weird looking faucets and like different two-tone cabinets of like the kitchens and like different colored appliances. You're like, people are gonna hate this, and now it's like kind of a thing, right? Yeah. So what would you say are some design trends to watch out for?
design trends to watch out for. Quiet luxury.
Okay, quiet
For
luxury,
sure,
yeah.
which I'll show some examples too,
Yeah.
right? Of, what quiet luxury looks like, because it's a little bit hard to
Yeah.
describe. But think about like how you can be comfortable in a space without it looking cheap or boring.
Yeah.
That's one thing I do want to talk about is, I'll oftentimes say to clients, like, I think this space is calling for something a little bit more traditional. And your personality is speaking to me to have something a little bit more traditional in here. And they hear traditional, they kind of equate that with boring, which is not the case.
Yeah.
Right. Like you can be really unique and you can have elements, again, to your personality that are still traditional and are going to evolve over time.
Yeah.
And then not to get too married too, to like, I like to get furniture that can be reupholstered, right? So maybe something is very soft and elegant and traditional today. 5 years from now, maybe that trend isn't as popular.
Yep.
It's not that difficult to reupholster something, to
Right.
make it, to
Okay.
bring new
True.
life to it, or to, redo a wall color, things like that. Another trend to watch out for is kind of mono color, right?
Okay.
So like a lot of people really, I say this to people and they kind of like cock their head, like, what do you mean we're using all shades of green? That's weird. That's going to look strange. Like, what are the complementary colors? But mono rooms are becoming really, really popular right now.
What's a mono room?
So mono room is kind of looking at a variety of shades within the same color family and layering those on top of each other.
Okay.
Right. So I was kind of doing some concepting for a space the other day. It's a really small space again, which I love doing small spaces because when you do that, these elements of design stand out a little bit more versus when you're doing a larger place where like those elements kind of get lost, but layering different colors on top of each other. So you may have a dark green sofa with light green curtains and, maybe somewhere in between that on the art and the pieces that you're styling around.
Yeah.
I just think it adds an element of like, it's fun.
Yeah.
Right. It strikes up a conversation. You walk and you're like, whoa, this person really loves green.
Yeah.
But then it just flows really naturally. So I think when you do that, those colors that might not seem contrasting actually become contrasting in and of themselves.
Speaking of contrasting colors, right? The color wheel is something that always blows my mind, right? It's like it's this reference point of like what colors kind of like mesh well with one another. And a lot of people just like, they don't have that inherent skill of like, this green will go with that brown or whatever. Like, I probably just said something terrible. You're going to slap me after this. But what's like a good way for people to be able to see if like, what is like a good, like monocolor or styling of like, like, is there a way for people to like look online? Are there like any good resources
There
online?
are. Yeah. I'll call out Pantone again, actually, because Pantone has a kind of color finding tool or color matching tool. So you say, I want to use that color of the year.
Yeah.
I want to use that kind of rose blush pink. I want to be trending. I want to have a really warm space.
Yeah.
You click that color and it's going to automatically build a palette of contrasting colors. And what's interesting is going back to the mono color scheme, you can do that. And sometimes it'll give you a bunch of oranges and pinks and other peaches. And you're like, whoa, that's overwhelming. But when you see them all together, it just looks really intentional and cool. So yeah, if you're kind of an amateur, you're just dabbling in interior design, maybe you don't want to hire an interior designer, you want to do it yourself, you've got the time to do it, use Pantone. And they can give you some pretty cool color palettes.
Now, I'd love to touch base on something that is a big trend, which is small spaces, right? Small spaces in real estate, as real estate becomes extraordinarily expensive, people are either not stuck, but like there's the word golden handcuffs where people can't move because their interest rates are just so good, or they can't upgrade, or they have to buy down on the size of what they originally wanted. And also just small home living. I saw like there's like a new trend for 400 square foot homes.
Yeah.
Right.
Tiny homes.
Yeah.
Who knew that was going to be a trend?
I know,
by the way.
but it's housing crisis and shortage. Like it's just evolving into what it is. People want to have a house and they want to have be settled. So like, what are some small space, best use of space design tricks, would you say?
Yeah, don't overclutter, right?
Right.
I'm stating the obvious here, but if you have a smaller space, the answer is to not fill it up with more things, right? Because then it looks like it's even more small, right? And you sit there and it feels kind of like constricting. You feel like the walls are closing in. So really think about space. Also lighting. Not enough people talk about lighting. They're like, oh, I really like this light fixture. I want to hang it up. Or like, oh, I really like these sconces. I'm going to put them here because they fit on the wall. Sure, there's an element of that.
Sure.
But the human mind, I always describe this. I'm very passionate about lighting, so buckle up for a little bit. You come in and I think your eye is naturally drawn to follow a pattern of light, if that makes sense, right? So when you're walking into a small space, especially if you've put time and effort into designing that space, you want to make sure nothing goes missed, right? And so something that's really important in those small spaces is having lighting at varying levels. throughout where the eye is going to travel.
Interesting.
If that makes sense, right? So you're going to have the overhead that's going to illuminate the whole space. But then where do you want them to look next? So that kind of goes back to what I was saying about the way that the space flows. That's not just how it flows when you're walking through the space, but how a space is being seen, how you're taking it in as somebody who's occupying that space. And so you kind of want the light to follow the path of what you want the people in the space or you in the space to travel, if that makes sense. Right. So like putting, to put it more like explicitly, hang a light, illuminate the whole space, but maybe you have one of those vignettes and you want to draw somebody's eye to that. You want to bring them into that space. That's naturally going to make it feel bigger. If they're traveling with their eyes across the entire space, it's naturally going to feel more open, if that makes sense. So make sure that you're utilizing floor lamps, table lamps, sconces, and overhead lighting. That's the best you can do for a small space. It's going to illuminate, it's going to highlight the right spots within that. And then it's just going to make people feel like they're experiencing something that's not just a 400-foot space, right? But that it's, you know, I can go over here and relax and read a book and drink a cup of coffee, or I can go over here and do some yoga, or I can go over here and crack a beer open or drink some bourbon, which we need to do soon.
Absolutely.
In the space.
So what would you say? Because like, you know, people are always, they want to do things always on a budget, right? But they want to do it. And I don't think necessarily you have to like spend crazy money to make something look great. I mean, we just sold a house in East Lakeview. My client, she spent a ton of time curating the space, but she didn't spend a ton of money. I mean, she spent good money, but she didn't spend like blind money where like it's just crazy. And like the reaction we got was massive money over asking. Massive, right? So is there like a way to be like conservative financially with like purchases? Like, is there like a place that you can go for like really good lighting that people don't think about, that like, because lighting can be super expensive, right? You go to Lightology and you're like, oh my God. Now necessarily like, yes, you're going to get what you pay for the most part, but is there like a nice medium of like what you found for your clients that these areas usually offer a lot for your money, like these specific providers?
In terms of like elements to invest in, or specific providers,
like specific, like what, like if somebody wants to like, you know, buy some furniture that isn't gonna like, you know, give them, you know, break the bank, but it's still gonna give them the appeal of like a high-end furniture store, or like they can't spend the Lightology money, but they like the Lightology effect. Have you found any sort of like places that are generally good value buy areas, or no?
There are, but I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. Good design costs money, right? I think there are things that you can do in terms of like painting, right? Or things that you can do in terms of like changing a light plate, right? They're very small stuff like that go a very long way. But if you want quality pieces, you've got to pay a little bit more.
I got you.
I mean, there are certainly places like that. Architecture is actually a really great vendor for lighting. We can share a link. So that's really great because they look really modern. They look like they're very expensive, but they're a little bit more approachable for, you know, the modern homeowner. People who aren't owning the $2 and $3 million homes. If you're owning a $2-3 million home, yes, go to Lightology.
I got it.
But yeah, I think there's certainly things that you can do like painting and just kind of small cosmetic stuff. I mean, you saw the house in Avondale that we sold. Yes, we put a lot of thought. Some of the pieces were very expensive, but like it was really just about the placement of a lot of that stuff. And it was the color and it was the lighting and all of those sorts of things. So that's another thing I think people get very intimidated by is, well, I'm not going to go spend $10,000 on design. You don't have to. Right. There's a lot you can do on budget. Some of my favorite projects were pretty low budget spaces in small units.
So I've had a question a long time about like, you know, because it's also overwhelming to think about. I want to hire an interior designer, right? And I'm assuming like there's a whole like different, like it's a whole catalog, right? Like you this or that. If somebody wants to just like jump and find a interior designer to help them with their specific project, is there a way for them to think about first how to think about it, where to find them, and then essentially like if you can give like overall expectation of cost?
Cost is a little hard, so we'll save that one for last.
Sure.
I mean, I'll talk a little bit about my approach.
Please.
Just because that's, you know, I oftentimes will just tell friends that I'm not going to go work for a friend and say, hey, we're going to do this big consult and you're going to pay me X amount of money. Like, I'll just sit with you in the space and kind of help you unpack your own thinking around the design. I approach design by trying to understand you before trying to understand the space. If that makes sense. So if you're doing this yourself, if you don't really want to hire an interior designer, just kind of ask yourself, like, how do I want to occupy this space? And kind of ask yourself, like, how do I live my life? Like, what feeling do I want to invoke? When I take on a new client, I'm asking everything from like favorite restaurants in your town?
Mhm.
If you were to pick top 3 travel destinations, where are you going to go? And asking these things that kind of like unpack a little bit who
That's
they
cool.
are, because you want that space to reflect them as well. Then you talk about the space.
Yeah.
So I would say, you know, if you're looking for an interior designer, obviously look at their portfolios, right? Like,
Right.
I truly believe that an interior designer doesn't have their own style. If that made the best interior designers don't have their own style, right? Like the best interior
like that.
designers are going to be very adaptable to what you need out of them, right? Like I never go in and I'm like, I look at a space and immediately I'm like, okay, this is what it needs. It needs to be here and here and here. Here's the cost. Here's
Interesting.
how we're going to start it.
Okay.
It's really just coming in and like understanding again who that person is, and then starting to build around that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It does. It does. But also like that depends, because some people are just like, I don't want to talk, just do it.
Yeah.
Right. And so like that
Sure.
could be like its own thing where it's just like, just make it look cool. Right.
Yeah.
So whatever. And it's like, but the people that are thoughtful, like then there's a space for that. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just like a broker, right?
Exactly.
If you want, you know, a style, because we're all like chameleons, right? Like we all have very specific personalities. And at the end of the day, like I mesh better with people just naturally. And some I'm just like trying to get information out of them, and some, maybe I shouldn't be doing that. Maybe they're just like, I just want to be quiet, just show me the house, right?
Yep.
But I just can't do that. Like I have like a nervous energy, right?
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. That like your approach is, I don't try to have my own design style. It's more about what do you want, and then I obviously have a great skill in it, but I can
Exactly.
give you the pointers on how to make it yours, not mine.
Yeah, I try to be multifaceted in what sort of design work I can do.
Yeah.
I'm not married to any one style. I certainly have my own personal preferences, right? So if I do come into a space and they're like, I don't really know what I want to do, just like tell me what you would do, that's where I kind of start to draw off my own personal style and how I marry that with what I've learned about that person. But yeah, at the end of the day, like there's not a one size fits all approach. And like you should have some sort of intention behind a space. If you're just coming in and saying, make it look cool, to use your language, well, what is cool? What does cool mean to you versus the next guy?
Got it.
So yeah, to talk about cost a little bit.
Yeah.
There's 2 different types of structures usually with an interior design. Some people will structure it where they take a certain percentage of what the purchase cost is for the items or the labor that they're putting into it.
Yeah.
Right. So say that you're coming in and redoing a bathroom, they're going to take anywhere from 20 to 25, maybe 30, depending on the person, of all of the kind of tile, the paint that's going in there. If you're putting in a bathtub, anything that's kind of fixed hardware, they would take a percentage on top of that. Or like furniture in a living room, right? Those can be some of the most expensive spaces because, as you know, those quality pieces can be pretty pricey. And then others will price it based off of square footage of the space that's being designed, right? So they'll say, okay, if you're designing a space between 1,000 and 5,000 square feet, here's what the cost is going to be. As we kind of do more than that, there's kind of these tiered sort of pricing structures.
Got it. Cool. Well, you know, I think that probably kind of covers it for today.
Yeah.
You know, I would love to keep these like kind of like design consultation meetings as we continue onwards. But Matt, thank you so much for coming in, man.
Yeah,
And
of
it's so good to see you. And like, you know,
always.
So Matt will send us links. We're going to put them into the body of this video about referencing some really good sites to go take a look at. You know, some just general inspiration. So use those. Reach out if you want to chat with Matt. Matt, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'll put the link in the bio as well. But aestheticedit.com. Check it out.
Aesthetic edit.
Aesthetic Edit.
Aestheticedit.com.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So yeah, let's end there, man.
Yes.
It's great.
Thanks so
My
much.
man.